Hello, fellow Cricketeers. So tonight we're going to do the next video here about taking these envelopes and cards that we've made and putting them back on a mat so that we can use the Cricut to draw on them. So in the last video we made this simple envelope. I've taped it together so you can kind of see what it would look like, and then our little simple folded card. And that we're going to need to write on. So the first thing to do is to decide where on these we're going to write. This being an envelope, we're thinking about doing a return address and then a mailing address. So that's what we're going to set up in Design Space. And then on the card, I want to put something, maybe you can put it on the outside of the card. You can fold it up and put it on the inside of the card. But for now, I'm just going to put it kind of on the outside of the card so you can see the process involved. Um, the key point in this process is going to be identifying what we call a reference point or an anchor point on both the envelope and the card. Now the envelope, because we're going to be using a return address, we're going to have an anchor point in this top left corner because of the return address being placed there. And on the card itself, we're going to have to create our own anchor point. And I'll show you how we do that as well. So to get started, we're going to place these on the mat so you can kind of see what that's going to look like. So let's grab one of my mats here. And I'm going to do both of them on the one mat so you can do them all at once. And I'm going to look for a place on the map that I know I can get to, and so I'm just going to start at the 1 and 1 kind of intersection here, and I'm going to place my envelope right aligned with that 1 inch from the top and 1 inch from the left, and kind of press that down so it's nice and solid. And so I know, again, the top left corner is at 1 and 1, so that's what I'm going to need to remember when I go into Design Space. And then for the card, we're going to find a spot, and I'll just do at the 1 and the 6. My mat's a little dirty, so I can't really see. Yeah, 1 and 6. So I'm going to put the top edge there, or the side edge there, 1 and 6. And there we go. So now I basically, on my mat in Design Space, have to remember that I'm going to use 1 and 1 for top left of the envelope and 1 and 6 for top left of the card. Now, because the card opens, I want to make sure that we can keep that down. So I have a little piece of tape here. I'm just going to tape this down to the mat, just to make sure it doesn't go flipping open when I'm actually writing on it. So that's what our mat's going to look like. We're going to move over to Design Space now, and you'll see how we set up Design Space to mirror this mat so that we get some good placement of our writing. Again, just really key point. Top left corner of the envelope, 1 and 1, that's an anchor point. Top left corner of the card at 1 and 6 is another anchor point. Okay, here we are in Design Space, and again we're going to be creating some text that we want to write onto our card that we have made or we've purchased or wherever we've gotten it from. We're going to put a card onto our mat and get that to be aligned with our text. If you remember, we have key anchor points. 1 and 1 is the envelope, and 1 and 6 was our card. So we're going to kind of, for visual purposes, use that reference here. And so I'm going to add some text. And we're going to call this our return address. And I'm going to do it, again, the top left corner of our envelope where the return address goes is at 1 and 1. So I'm going to put that there. And I'm going to, of course, shrink it down to return address size, give or take. That's about okay. Now, because I'm going to be doing this on a with a pen, I want to change the writing style to the font style to writing. You see it gets quite more thin there. You need to find, of course, a writing style font for the best results. Otherwise, any other font that you use is going to end up being basically outlined the way that works. But that's a topic for another video. So I got my return address. I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate that and bring it down here for, for the mailing address. You can see what that would look like. Of course, the mailing address can be a little bit larger, so we'll make that a little bit larger here to kind of replicate that. Now, I know the size of my envelope, and of course, you'll have yours you can measure. The writing space of my envelope happens to be about 4.5 tall by about 5.5 wide, give or take. So what that means is because the point on my mat that the envelope was placed is at 1 and 1, I need to make sure that all of my writing is on the envelope does not go past, I would say, like 5.5 inches. And if I look at my measurements up here, 5.5 brings me here, which I'm plenty in line with. So just when you're making your address, make sure you keep the font to a point where it does not go past where your envelope stops on the mat. And the height is about 4.5. And so that puts me pretty close to the bottom here at 4.5. So I want to make sure I'm not too far down. So I can actually just make this a little bit smaller. And that puts me at the bottom of my writing is on 4. Since my envelope goes down to the 5.5 mark, that gives me plenty of room to work with. So basically, I've placed the return address and the mailing address where I'd like them to be. Now, if you need more visual help, a simple thing to do is just to add a shape of a square. And I'm going to make the square the same size as my envelope. Again, it was let's say about 5.5 wide by 4.5 high. So that's about what I've got. I'm going to send this with a range. I'm going to move it backward. And I'm going to make it a lighter color just to kind of make sure we can see things past it. I'm going to move this. Oops, I got to go back to a range. I want to send it all the way to the back, that one. So if this shape mimics my envelope, I can arrange my text within the shape to kind of get visual. Maybe I want this more centered, right? If that's what I want, I can make that happen as well. So this shape just kind of gives me a visual cue to placement of my text on my envelope. And if this looks about right, give or take, alignment and such, I can keep that where it is. And so to make sure that this is going to print exactly where I want it on the mat, I'm going to take my return address and the mailing address, and I'm going to select those two things, and I need to attach them. This is going to make those two things stay relative to each other anywhere I place it on the mat. Okay, so I can get rid of my envelope visual now because I don't need that. And my mailing address, return address, they're attached. They're good to go. Remember I mentioned before, our key point in this process is finding our anchor point, and I'm using top left corners of the pieces I have on the mat as our anchor point. And the return address is going to be in the top left corner, so that becomes the anchor point on this image, basically. And we'll see how that goes when we go to make it, but basically just keep in mind the top left corner is our anchor point that's going to match to what we have on the mat. So that's our address. I'll move that over to there. And remember, we're doing an envelope and a card on the same mat. So now I'm going to do the same thing with my shape to make a visual representation of the card. And it's a square in my card. My card measurements were, again, 5.5 high by about 4.25 wide. So I'm going to make those measurements here. 5.5, unlock that by 4.25. Oops, I did that backwards. I need 4.25 wide by 5.5 high. And there's my card. Again, I'll make it white so it's easy to see the text around it. And so that's my card. I need to get some text in here. I'll just say this is inside the card. And actually, I'm doing the front of the card, I think, the way I have it set up. So yeah, we'll just change this just to say front of card. It's already set to writing because that's what I just used, so I will just make that small enough to actually fit. And if you wanted to add anything else to the card, you wanted to cut a piece out of it or anything to that effect, you can always do that. I'm going to just add a shape real quick, a little heart on top just to give it a little extra something. So we have a couple objects to kind of work with alignment on. And I want my heart to be an exact 1-inch high heart, so I'll just kind of make it that way. And again, I'm going to make this a draw, and you'll see that it does an outline, and that's fine. So here's where we do the anchor part again, right? Because on the address piece, we had the return address, that was our anchor point, and that was in the top left of our image. We don't have anything in the top left corner of our actual image to anchor with, so we have to create something there. So again, we need to create an anchor point for our card images that we're going to put on there. And I want, again, to make it to my top left because I said at the beginning when we made our mat that our card top left is at 1/6. So I like to use the top left area. So basically, I need to make a point that's going to keep the stuff I want to draw on my card in reference, in relative position to the top left position of the card. Okay? Easiest thing I've found to do is I'm going to make a circle. I'm going to put this down here, but I want the circle to be basically at the top left of my card, but I need it to be a really small circle. So I'm going to go up here and just make it a 0.01 circle. Makes it really tiny. I'm going to grab my little 0.01. It's hard to grab that small, so I'm actually going to zoom in a little bit to make it easier to grab. And here we go. So I can grab this guy. You might be able to use the arrow keys to move it, but one trick you can use, because it is so small to grab, I can see on my canvas here that at the moment, and this is going to change when we go to the map, but just for reference, the visual aspect is at 6 and at 1. So I can do that manually with my little dot here. For the position, under more here, more options, I'm going to put this at 6 and 1. There we go. So we have 6 and 1. That puts that dot right at the very top corner of our card. Remember, this white box is the kind of visual of our card. So we've got the stuff we want to print on our card and this reference point for our card. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get rid of my visual aspect of the card, and I'm going to select all the options here, along with our reference point and our heart and our kind of text we want to work with. And I'm going to attach all of those. So now I've got this one image that's going to get drawn, and what's going to happen is that top left dot we've just made is going to reference to the top left of our card. Okay, I'm going to show you how that works on the mat in a second. I just forgot one little thing, and that is we want this circle here to not cut. We don't want to use a blade for this. We want to make that a draw. So I'm going to go ahead and make that our draw as well. Now, excuse me, now we are ready to put this onto our card. So just to kind of reiterate, I've said it 1,000 times already, but it's kind of the linchpin to this entire thing is this top left anchor point. The return address is at the top left point of our envelope, so that acts as our anchor in that case. The card, we had to create something in the top left corner that we can now go onto the Make It screen and place specifically on our mat. That's the key. So we go to Make It. We have everything on one mat. And if you remember before we did this, I showed you my mat, and I have the address label, the envelope, sitting at the 1 and 1 spot on my mat. So I just have to make sure that I can zoom in if I want. I want to make sure that this object of address matches up. I can't grab it today. Matches up to that 1 and 1 section. And what I usually do is I kind of come in just a hair beneath and over, because I want to make sure I've got a little bit of a buffer and that I'm not actually writing on a crease or part of that card there. So I kind of come in just under the 1 and just over from the 1 to give it some extra room. And I can visually check now that this entire object will not write anything past the 4.5 mark. I need to go ahead and look at my mat and decide that the envelope, does give me plenty of space for that. So I'm good to go there. Now we have the other piece that we're going to write onto our card. And for this one, I went ahead and made our top left mark again, because remember, I keep harping on it, but that's the key point. On our mat, we set our card to be at the 1 and the 6, and so I need the top left of this image to be at 1 and 6 as well. So I'm going to grab this, move it over to 1 and 6, and now I'm going to give you a little bit of another tip that you want to look at. Because this anchor point is going to be drawn, the pen will come down on that point, which will make a little dot on your card. To avoid that, you can actually make sure that that little dot exists just outside where that card will be. So if I put the dot there, it's just outside, which is going to move our image a little bit over, but you could account for that on the design space screen if you really wanted to be an exact measurement. But because I don't want the dot to be on the top left corner, I want to kind of push it outside of that area so it doesn't actually touch the card. And that should be just about enough to get that to happen. So this matches up with our mat that we made. And when I go to make it, we'll see some pictures of what that's going to look like.